All right. Welcome to SLUG 2022, another year of virtual presentations. We're excited to bring this event to you via the live stream and hope that you will enjoy this and the other presentations. I am Jason Booth and I oversee the support staff here at Scalability. Just a quick overview of the agenda. You are currently watching the first session. In this session, I'll be covering field notes from the front lines of support. We'll be doing 7 separate presentations with 7 different streams. This and the following presentations will remain available on Scalability's YouTube channel for at least the first 2 weeks, if not indefinitely, after SLUG 2022. You can view the stream on our YouTube channel or directly through the links from the agenda. Feel free to ask questions through the YouTube chat. Chat is moderated by Scalability staff. You can identify them in the chat as they have the wrench symbol next to their names. Questions through the chats will be relayed to the presenter by one of the moderators. And we may defer some of these questions to the end if they cannot be relayed in a timely fashion. Note that some questions may be answered by the moderators directly. It has been our tradition over the last several SLUG conferences to cover what we have nicknamed field notes, which are common issues we see from sites we work with. This presentation builds off of last year's slide deck and live broadcasts, which are accessible through the Scalability publications website and our YouTube page. This should be a meaningful topic for your site, and I hope your site finds value in what I have prepared. Because these field notes build off of last year's slides, you will see some familiar topics refreshed and new ones. I like to refer to these items as golden nuggets of knowledge that our support team sees often. So let's talk about the purpose of the many topics I'll cover today. The purpose is to show you how to get the most out of your support experience and point you in a better direction while setting up and working with Slurm. The agenda for this presentation is as follows. As you will notice, these topics are somewhat grouped together. However, I do split off into more non-related topics, especially near the end of the presentation. So I have labeled these as random notes and observations. Next, we'll be covering the history of Scalability and Slurm to better understand the company and the developers behind Slurm, the best practices when upgrading to newer versions of Slurm, adding and removing nodes, a feature we see more and more adoptive called Configless, a feature of storing job scripts and improvements to that feature, Slurmdbd purge, log, rotate, and archive. A few notes on scalability and what you should be aware of, a quick note on Cgroups, and a few random notes on coredumps, debugging, and finally, our support offering. So history. Slurm has been around since 2002 and has come a long way since its early days as a resource manager. In the past, Slurm used to be an acronym which stood for Simple Linux Utility for Resource Management. It surprised us to see the use of Slurm in all capital letters even after so many years. We don't refer to Slurm in all capitals anymore and have not done so for many years. The official change happened in 2012. Today, when using Slurm, you should only capitalize the first S and the rest in lowercase. As mentioned previously, Slurm has been around since 2002. Scalability as a company was not far behind, following just 8 years later. Scalability opened its doors in 2010, offering part-time customer Slurm developed, 100% owned by Danny Abel and Mois Jetty. In 2011, Mo and Danny made Scalability their full-time passion. In 2014, the team started to grow, and so did interest in Slurm. In 2016, Scalability relocated from Livermore, California to Lehi, Utah. Since then, we have moved to a new, larger location in Lehi to accommodate our growing business needs. In 2017, we had 11 employees, mainly support and development engineers. As of 2022, we are a healthy 30 employees with the majority of our staff in support and development. Scalability's company goals are to provide amazing commercial support for Slurm and make sure we keep our dominance on the top 100 systems and to keep Slurm open source. It has been exciting to be part of a growing community that backs Slurm. Although we do not know exact adoption numbers, we do know how many sites Scalability supports. As interest in Slurm and Slurm support through Scalability has grown substantially over the 9 years, from 67 sites in 2013 to our 480 sites in 2022. As a company, we thank you for your support. Your support allows us to do what we love, which is develop and further improve Slurm and to provide you with access to Slurm engineering support. One final note here, we are hiring. We are looking for C developers who are interested in working on Slurm and who also enjoy supporting Slurm user base. If you are interested, we invite you to apply to work with us. You can do so via the careers page or by emailing us in the email address above. Excuse me. Now let's get into field notes, starting off with the system requirements. This is a noteworthy topic as we often see several questions. Excuse me, like this. What type of hardware do I need to run Slurm in my environment? Starting off, the controller prefers faster, fewer cores. So a system with, say, 4 cores and high clock speed will perform better than a system with 6 cores and low clock speed. The control also performs better with fast access to state save location. The state save location is a configurable option found in the slurm.conf and should be on some type of fast storage such as NVMe. The reason for this is listed in the details above. Slurm does a lot of file access, and that access grows with larger sites and larger workloads. Note that for those sites and users who like to spawn lots of jobs, you can make use of job arrays to help reduce the strain on storage, as this will only store one job script and environment file per entire job array. Continuing on, as mentioned previously, Slurm prefers higher core frequencies over core count. The memory depends on the number of jobs your site pushes through in a given day or week, and also depends on if you plan to run the Slurmdbd on the same system. We generally recommend a system with at least 16 gigabytes of RAM, a dual-core CPU with a high clock frequency, and a dedicated SSD NVMe. This assumes that you are doing about 100,000 jobs a day and about 700,000 jobs a week. Note that the amount of RAM required will increase with higher workloads and node counts. Using the same example as before, 700,000 jobs a week, we recommend that the following for the Slurmdbd: a system with fast disk NVMe or SSD and lots of RAM, 16 to 32 gigabytes. The RAM requirement goes up in relation to the number of jobs you wish to store or query. The CPU selection here is not as important as a Slurm CTLD, so you have more options for the Slurmdbd. So I'd say this system would be just fine for a site that has 500 nodes and pushes 100,000 jobs a day or 700,000 jobs a week. Moving along to upgrades. There are a number of reasons to upgrade. Probably the most compelling is that we target the most recent release for bug fixes, which as of today is 2205. Along these same lines, we continue to optimize, rewrite code, and make scheduler improvements. So if you are on an older version such as 1808, consider upgrading soon. For our supported clients, their support contract requires staying on a current release. Plus, by upgrading, you get to take advantage of all the performance and enhancements by staying current. When upgrading, you should follow the upgrade procedure found on our website, which I'll go over. There is a specific sequence to use when upgrading between major versions of Slurm. We have built-in support for the last major 3 releases so long as you follow the hierarchical sequence. The Slurmdbd needs to be greater than or equal to the Slurm CTLD. The Slurm CTLD needs to be greater than or equal to the Slurmds. You can include in here that the Slurmd needs to be greater than or equal to the Slurmstbds if you are upgrading with running jobs. Although generally speaking, sites drain the cluster when moving between major releases. So, should you upgrade with running jobs, then you will want to open a support request with us so that we can assist with your upgrade needs. Continue on, the Slurmds need to be greater than or equal to the client commands. Also note that you can mix maintenance releases without issues, but it will make our support staff question you about your setup when we see this in your environment. For example, you can mix 2205.5 and 2205.2. This is a compatible setup. Please note we patched some serious security problems earlier this year. If your site has not upgraded in some time, then please make plans to upgrade as soon as possible. We made major changes to the underlying way in which we handle credentials. Due to the complexity of these fixes, we do not recommend attempting to backport the fixes to older releases and strongly encourage sites to upgrade to fixed versions immediately. We have seen the best results when sites upgrade to the same fixed version. Once your site does upgrade, you can enable the block null hash communication parameters. This can only be safely enabled after all daemons are on the same version and restarted and all jobs have completed. This option adds additional redundant layer of security, and we encourage your site to enable this after upgrading and after all running jobs have completed. Just a side note about RPMs. RPMs do make the upgrade process difficult to do on a live system. Although we ship and support the slurm.spec, our general recommendation is to not use RPMs to install Slurm. Instead, we recommend that you use version-specific directories and use symlinks or module files to manage versions. This makes rolling upgrades much simpler as you just have to replace symlinks. Here's an example of an upgrade procedure we recommend. You can see we have an apps directory that we use as the prefix for Slurm. And under the Slurm directory, we have stored the 2205.3 release. To make upgrades easier, you then use a symlink to the services you share out to the cluster. In this case, the DBD refers to the Slurmdbd, the CTL, the Slurmctld, and the D, the Slurmd. Current is the current version of Slurm. Each of them can then be shared out over a shared file system such as NFS. Make sure to reference these symlinks in each service file, as well as in any environment pass through the profile.d or module file. This procedure makes rolling upgrades much simpler just by moving a symlink when you are ready for an upgrade to the next release. Backing up the MySQL database used by the Slurmdbd is strongly encouraged when upgrading. You should probably be doing this already as part of your regular backup strategy, but this would be a good time to make sure that those backup methods work. For example, verify that the MySQL dump command is actually exporting data from MySQL and that the data exported is complete. For large databases, more unusual systems, you can test the upgrade database conversion with a copy of your full production database on a separate machine. This separate system could be a spare blade or a VM you have with a later version of Slurm installed. You would restore the database and set the correct slurmdbd.conf parameters to point to that database and make sure the test system slurm.conf has the same cluster name. We highly encourage using more recent versions of MySQL or MariaDB, not only for their security patches, but also performance and bug fixes. We have seen a handful of bugs reported where the fix for database conversion issues was to upgrade from MySQL or MariaDB 5.5. Slurmdbd will automatically convert the MySQL schema. This can take 10 to 15 minutes or more depending on the size of the database, and can increase with underlying slow system storage. We highly recommend taking a backup of the state save location as well. The state save location and the DBD dump can help assist recovering from a failed upgrade attempt. Please note that once a daemon has been upgraded, you cannot roll back to a prior major version without losing data and your job queue. Although there's no set value for inode buffer pool size for all sites, we do suggest somewhere between 5 to 50% of available memory. Sites that upgrade and have a larger than normal database should increase this value for the database conversion and later return it to a more reasonable value after the upgrade process. Also, sites should make sure they have enough temp space and that temp does not fill up during the upgrade process, or you'll have a bad experience. Keep in mind with major OS releases or kernel upgrades, subtle changes may happen. For example, free-m may report different memory values between kernel versions. Cgroups v2 or hybrid mode may be enabled. Sites may unintentionally upgrade to a different version of MySQL or MariaDB. More on this in the next slide. So before MariaDB 10.2.1, blob and text columns could not be assigned default values. This restriction was later lifted in MariaDB version 10.2.1. With some OSs, the base OS shipped with MySQL 5.5 and later used MariaDB 10.5, which changed the default value handling. Contact support if you are migrating from MySQL 5.5 to MariaDB or migrating from MariaDB versions older than 10.2.1. The default value change symptoms show up as no error, nothing deleted in logs, and it appears as though you can't delete associations. It is worth noting that mixing versions such as 2205 and 2108 clusters in a multi-cluster setup is something we are seeing more of. If you are doing this, please use the older clients if submitting between these two clusters that share a single Slurmdbd. Please refer to our supportability matrix. All right, moving on to node addition and removal. Pause, get a drink. Adding or removing nodes in Slurm is a sensitive operation. This seems to cause problems for each site at least once early on. Certain internal data structures are built off the node list at startup and are used within the communication subsystems. Changing the node definitions and restarting only the controller will usually lead to communication errors as messages are misrouted internally. For adding or removing nodes, we recommend that you first stop the controller, change the configs, restart all the Slurmd processes, and then start the Slurm controller. Following this procedure will ensure that the entire cluster has the correct layout for proper communication. A less safe method, but usually okay, would be to change configs, restart the controller, restart all the Slurmd processes really quickly. As a side note, there are longer-term plans to make this process less painful. However, there is still some work needed, which also relies on us moving away from cons res before that work can take place. Some of the needed changes already exist in cons res with the separation of some of these data structures. A word of warning. We have seen a number of clusters use no conf hash and config override as a way to improperly add or remove nodes, or even change the configured resources on a node. Please do not do this. Those options are there to tell you when something is wrong. Your config file should be synced across the entire cluster, and the running configuration, or in-memory config, should match on all the controllers and Slurmds. There are some use cases for these options. However, a production environment should ask themselves what they are doing and what they are trying to accomplish when considering these parameters. All right, do not remove a partition with running jobs on it. Instead, we recommend draining the partition first. Some additional considerations while adding and removing nodes from a partition with running jobs. It is fine so long as the node is not removed from the slurm.conf until the job completes. Moving nodes between partitions is also fine, but will not receive workload until the current running job on the node finishes. All right. Now on to the exciting topic of Configless. I'll get into the details here in a moment, but I want to take some time and say that I really believe this is the future of managing Slurm configuration files. I know each site has their own method of deploying configuration changes. I hope that you might consider this feature for your cluster. Configless Slurm is a feature that allows the compute nodes, specifically the Slurmd processes and user commands running on login nodes, to pull configuration information directly from the controller, instead of from a pre-distributed file location. Your cluster does require a central set of configuration files on the Slurm controller. Configless, in one sentence, means that the compute nodes, login nodes, and other cluster hosts do not need to be deployed with local copies of these files. Note, Slurmdbd does not need or use these config files, so it does not make sense to have these services use Configless. There are no extra steps required to install this feature. It is built in by default, starting with Slurm'22. Even though there are no additional install steps, there is still a Slurm CTLD parameters called enable Configless that you add to your slurm.conf on the controller. Adding this option does require a restart of the Slurm CTLD. The setup on the compute nodes is just as simple as the server, and there are two options available to you to enable this. You can start the Slurmd with --conf-server and specify the server name, or a DNS SRV record. When using the DNS SRV record, the compute nodes should not have local configuration files on them, as this will cause the nodes to honor what is in the local configuration file over the server issued conf file. We will get into the hierarchical order of this a bit later into the slide deck. The --conf server also provides the required information to the Slurmd on startup, enabling the service to pull down the needed configuration files. In the example above, the --conf server, the server Slurm CTLD primary runs on 6817. For the DNS SRV record as shown above, multiple SRV records can be specified if you have deployed Slurm in an HA setup. The DNS SRV record with the lowest priority should be your primary Slurm CTLD, with higher priority values for backup Slurm CTLDs. As you can see here, I have a visual representation of a basic cluster with a Slurm controller setup with the Slurm CTLD parameters enable Configless, a Slurmd, and two client-side systems where client commands can be ran. The light blue represents the server where all the Slurm config files are stored, and the orangish yellow represents Configless clients. This includes the Slurmd. Some caution should be taken for client commands. There are basically two ways that work. On nodes with a Slurmd running, it is assumed that you won't have a default slurm.conf file, so it just checks in the synced location for one. By default, this is the comp cache directory found underneath the Slurm spoolder. Slurm spoolder is configurable. If you don't run a Slurmd on the node where client commands are issued and it can't find a config file, the last thing it tries is to use a DNS SRV record to look up where the Slurm CTLD is and will request the configs. A warning when using just the DNS entry. If you have a large grouping of jobs being submitted, you may experience an RPC flood. I'll talk about this a little more in a later slide. We generally suggest that you run Slurmd to manage the configs on login and submit hosts that run client commands, and just not let jobs get scheduled on your front-end client nodes. In this way, the client commands will pull from the local cache storing the config files. What we were trying to avoid is a bunch of client commands that also need to request the config files from the server. This obviously does not scale well with many jobs being submitted at once. This is a continuation of the small Configless setup earlier. We have added the Slurmd processes to the two client nodes. These Slurmds can point to the slurmctld but not reside in any partition. This will then allow the client commands to access the configuration files from the shared comp cache directory that is created by the Slurmd processes and avoids having client commands requesting configurations from the server. With this setup, the cluster will perform much better and there will be fewer RPCs. With the slurmctld configuration configured and the slurmd started, you can verify the setup by checking in a couple of places to make sure the configs are present on the node. Config files will be in the slurmd folder under comp cache directory, and a symlink to the location will be created automatically in the run slurm/slurm/conf directory. You can confirm that reloading is working by adding a comment to your slurm.conf on the controller node and running scontrol reconfigure and checking that the config was updated. Note that there is a hierarchical order to how the slurmd clients behave in a config setup. First, the -s conf -server is checked. Second, the -f is then checked to see if a valid configuration was specified. Third, the environment variable slurm config is checked. Fourth, the default config path is checked, most commonly etc slurm.conf. Lastly, the DNS SRV record is checked. As noted previously, if you are using the DNS SRV record, make sure local copies of the configs are not present on those nodes or submit hosts, as they are honored over the DNS SRV records. Here's a slide that covers which comps are copied over. Note that we do not copy any include files with this solution, so please take measures to either consolidate your include configuration files into one or use some other method to distribute them. There are a few known issues at this time. The Perl API does not work with Configless prior to 20.02.6. This affects sites using the integration scripts. As mentioned already, any include files will not be distributed with this model. Adding and removing nodes is still not supported even with Configless. As a final note here, and because it does not fit anywhere else in my presentation, if you still plan to use traditional method of distributing config files, please do not ignore the conf mismatch errors. When you see these errors, they should be a priority to resolve. All right, moving on to archiving job scripts. Slurm now supports the ability to archive job scripts in the Slurm database if your site is on 21.08 or later. There are also significant improvements to this feature in 22.05. Slurm stores batch and environment variables in index tables. This has significantly reduced disk space where sites use the same job script for multiple jobs. Note that when upgrading from 21.08, if you have used this feature, then the stored job scripts will be moved and indexed automatically in 22.05 during the upgrade process. To use this feature, there are a few changes you need to make in your configuration that I'll go over. To enable this feature in your environment, you'll need to have the Slurmdbd enabled and configured correctly in the Slurm controller. Then in your slurm.conf, you will need to add the new accounting storage flags job script. This will instruct Slurm to archive job scripts into the database for later retrieval. A noteworthy mention here is that with the addition, we also renamed the previous accounting storage job comment to job comment and now require it to be set as an accounting store flags. Finally, It is also worth pointing out that admin comments and system comments are always recorded in the database. Slurm also has the ability to limit the job script size stored. Part of this new feature comes the ability to set a new scheduler parameters max script size. By default, this is 4 megabytes. Larger values may have a negative impact on your system, so please use caution when setting this. To query the job script, you will need to specify the option --batch script with sact. Other semi-related options here are the field submit line and comment line, which you can access with the saccount-o option. You can view more options with saccount-help format for these and other options available to you. Before moving on to the next subject, I have an example for you that shows what the output of the batch script looks like from sact. It is a simple script that sleeps and prints the environment, however, does show the new feature in action. Moving on to Slurmdbd purge and DB archiving. We see questions on this often, and so I have a few comments to share with you regarding database archiving and purging. The Slurm database can grow quite large over time. As an admin, you have some options available to you to help prevent the database from growing too large, namely backing up your database, truncating old usage, job and event data. Slurmdbd also provides a set of options to automatically purge and archive data. For sites that still wish to access older data, this information can be stored in a non-production instance of Slurmdbd. The purge options can be specified when the purge of respective entities occur. The default value for each of these options is to never purge. However, a value of, say, 12 hours would purge everything older than 12 hours. All right, we had a small hiccup to our internet. We should be back on now. I believe I left off on purging and archiving. So continue on, the Slurm database can grow quite large over time. As an admin, you have some options available to you that help you prevent the database from growing too large, namely backing up your database, truncating old usage, job and event data. Slurmdbd also provides a set of options to automatically purge and archive data. For sites that still wish to access older data, this information can be stored in a non-production instance of Slurmdbd. The purge options can be used to specify when the purge of a respective entity occurs. The default values for each of these options is to never purge. However, a value of, say, 12 hours would purge everything older than 12 hours, and a purge after 12 months would purge everything older than 12 months. Just a side note about archive Slurmdbd instances. The Slurmdbd instance is separate from the archive option just covered. This is an isolated instance of Slurmdbd that runs a copy or part of a copy of the database. It is possible to restore an entire copy or part of the production database to some other instance of Slurmdbd. In this way, historical information can still be queried without loading in old archived data files on the production system. If you have questions about this, we encourage you to log a support case with us for details. The benefits of purging or archiving are that these do not impede production and help admins only worry about keeping that information that is necessary for their production environment. One drawback is that the information will be on a separate instance and most likely a different machine. All right, moving on to scalability. To start the conversation on scalability, I wanted to talk about the state save location. Slurm's performance and responsiveness under heavy load will be governed by the latency of any reading or writing operation from the state save location. Your system's throughput and overall responsiveness under heavy load will be governed by any latency from the state save location. Special consideration should be taken here, especially high throughput environments where there is a workload of a large number of short running jobs. You may be better off with having an NVMe drive in a single controller in this instance. Some sites use an NFS mount that is also shared with users, and these shares can be frequently taxed. In these setups, you are more likely to see performance issues. As of 2011, there is a new and documented Slurm CTLD parameters option called Enable RPC-Q. This option may alleviate high contention between RPC processing threads in some environments. Enabling RPC-Q creates a queue of RPCs. Instead of handling RPCs one by one in a separate thread, which can create RPC storms, we handle RPCs in batches, still using threads, but doing so smarter. For those sites who have support, it would be a good idea to let us know if you intend to enable this experimental feature, especially in production. Another word of advice when dealing with lots of jobs, nodes, and client requests. Increasing the default number of munge threads can help alleviate contention and avoid resending messages that may have timed out while munge was busy servicing a few requests. For this, we suggest setting the munge thread count to 10. Any cluster may benefit from making this change without the worry of it causing negative impacts on the system. Another pain point that we see every so often relates to how often the identity management system is accessed. Hundreds of thousands of queries can cause latency issues and cause jobs to time out with sites that have very active or have a high throughput workload. For this unique case, Slurm provides NSS Slurm. This optional NSS plugin permits PSSWD and group resolution for a job on the compute node to be serviced through the local Slurmdbd process. The advantage here is that a site can reduce the number of queries against LDAP, SSSD, and NSLCD. And for sites that burst out into the cloud, there is no need to duplicate identity services on those cloud nodes. NSS Slurm is not meant to be a full replacement for network directory services such as LDAP, but is a way to remove load from those systems to improve the performance of large-scale job launches. It accomplishes this by removing the thundering herd issue should all tasks of a large job make simultaneous lookup request, generally for info related to users themselves, which is the only information NSS Slurm will be able to provide. Please note that NSS Slurm will only return results for processes within a job step. It will not return any results for processes outside of these steps, such as system monitoring, node health checks, prolog and eplog, and related node system processes. Of course, there are other measures you can take to improve your system's responsiveness today, such as tuning the scheduler parameters, adjusting times, the previously mentioned use of job arrays, adjusting U-limits, disabling unnecessary plugins, limiting logging to error messages only, turning on caching in NSCD or SSSD. Of course, you are welcome to reach out to support with your questions. There's also a good set of information found on our high throughput page. Moving on to Cgroups. We'll cover some brief information here. This section mostly relates to recent changes. As of 2108, Cgroups v1 has been rewritten. With this rewrite, we have fixed a number of issues and bugs and added better error logging. The benefit with these changes are a seamless transition when upgrading. There are no special considerations or configuration options here. The end user should not notice this change. Cgroups v2 is also now supported as of 2205. Do make sure that you are not running in hybrid mode. Compute nodes need to either be on v1 or v2. Having some compute nodes run v1 and some run v2 are supported, although having different nodes run different versions will add complexity when troubleshooting issues. Many sites that use Cgroups have also ran into a number of errors, such as unable to open some path, unable to get Cgroup, device resource busy, no such file or directory, or Cgroups that already exist. 2008 fixes these and other issues. Even if your site has not seen these issues, but you use Cgroups, you should be making plans to move to more modern supported versions such as 2205, as you eventually will run into some of these issues. Moving along, a quick note on TaskPlugin. We recommend stacking Task Affinity and Task Cgroup together. We have seen a number of configurations where only Task Affinity is set up, which is not ideal. Most sites want to set the affinity with Cgroups, as this combines the best of both worlds when constraining resources. Note that both options will enable the srun CPU bind and --mem-bind options. Finally, a note on Task Affinity found in the cgroup.conf. This has been removed in 2108. Sites should remove this option from their cgroup.conf during the upgrade process and use the TaskPlugin, Task Affinity, and Task Cgroup. And as mentioned before, if you are seeing Cgroup issues, please make plans to test more recent versions and move to a current Slurm version. Before I end with a word about our support organization, I wanted to mention a few random notes. Here are a few random suggestions related to coredumps. We hope you never get one, but should you, we recommend knowing the following locations of where those coredumps are stored. If the slurmctld is started with a -D option, then the core file will be written to the current working directory. If slurmctld log file is an absolute path, the core file will be written to this directory. Otherwise, core files will be written to the state save location or /var/temp as a last resort. Please make sure that the coredump location is accessible by Slurm user and that the user has write permissions to that directory. If none of the above directories have write permissions for Slurm user, no core file will be produced. For testing purposes, the command scontrol abort can be used to abort the slurmctld daemon and generate a core file. Please do not send core files. In almost all cases, we will not be able to read them. Please do gather a backtrace for us to review with the following GDB options mentioned in this slide. There are other considerations. Please see our FAQ page for further details. The final random suggestions to be aware of are the debugging options. Each service has a -D flag, which will run the service in the foreground and print debugging directly to the terminal. Note that you would not normally use these unless directed to do so by support. However, these are useful if, say, a service such as Slurmd is not starting and the logs do not contain enough information. Continuing on, there are also some useful commands to be aware of. If you want to change debugging for the controller but do not want to edit the configuration file, you can issue an scontrol set debug followed by the debug level. Note that this will only affect the scheduler and not the Slurmds. For Slurmds, you will need to modify the slurm.conf and issue scontrol reconfigure. For client commands, you can use the -v option, which will generate logging for that command directly to the terminal. Multiple -v options can be used to increase the verbosity of output. As a neat trick, I've included the sbatch --test-only option, which will validate the job script and return an estimate when the job would be scheduled given the current job queue. This is a dry run and no job is actually submitted. This can be handy for those users who log help desk bugs and want to know if they are submitting correctly or want to have an estimate of when they can expect their jobs to start. Before I briefly cover our support, I wanted to also say that the tips and tricks I've covered today are some of the most common ones we see in support. There are, of course, many others and tools that I did not cover. And if you are interested in what is available to help you as a site, then please do engage us via our support group. Scalability offers level 3 support only, that is development support, and puts you right into contact with the development team. We do ask that customers be comfortable with the day-to-day operations and know how to troubleshoot and be able to do the initial setup. We also offer on-site training to assist with initial onboarding and software configuration. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us via email with those questions. Our workflow as a company and as support starts with our bug tracking system. For this, we use Bugzilla. This allows transparent handing off between engineers and thorough bug tracking. By default, these bugs are public, however, we can make these private when requested. We offer specific contractual timelines for each severity level. Our support staff also cover from 2 a.m. Mountain Standard Time to 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, or 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. GMT, Monday through Friday, with engineers covering Europe and North America. We pride ourselves on beating the service level agreement, regardless of your system size or complexity. All right, are there any questions? So one question is, can we archive job scripts to file system location instead of the database? Currently, no, not without doing some custom scripting in order to get that. I believe Sean Hoops also brought up the following, that the pound includes is supported in recent versions of Slurm. That was a recent addition. I had forgotten to mention that. Thank you, Sean, for pointing that out. Another question is there a syntax checker? Not currently, but you can use commands to validate that. So for example, you could run the previously mentioned sbatch command, or running the client commands is probably the best option to see that. They'll spit out errors if your config file is not correct in that case. But as far as a syntax checker, we do not have one at this time. So I do see some additional questions that require a little more conversation. I'd say for those ones, open up a support case with us and let's discuss those further with our support staff. Another question, is there a way to rename a Slurm account? So, no, not currently. All right, it looks like we'll wrap it up. I want to thank everyone again for tuning in. Thank you very much for watching. And just a reminder that the next presentation will be on a separate stream, and we'll begin at 10. Thank you.